Alright guys, tonight we're going to take a look at the Golgari control deck. And the whole reason to play this deck is because the best control planeswalker in the game is green. Plus black has the best removal, but Nissa Vastwood Seer is a 3-mana 2/2. When she enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic forest, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, exile her, flip her over to her planeswalker side, which is Nissa Sage Animist. She comes in with 3 loyalty. Her +1 reveals the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it right into play. If it's anything else, you just draw it. For -2, she can create a legendary 4/4, so she protects herself. And her ultimate wins the game pretty much on the spot because you get to swing for 36 with your lands. So, yeah, she's pretty nuts. She's pretty insane. Really, really good card. And the other reason to play this deck is Evolutionary Leap. 2-mana enchantment, but you pay green, sacrifice a creature, and you reveal cards off the top until you reveal a creature, and then you draw that card, and those other cards go to the bottom of your deck. So, it just blanks all your opponent's removal. You get to just draw cards. You can sacrifice your mirrors on demand. It's just an absolutely insane card. It's funny that green is a decent base for a control deck, but it really is. So let's just go down to the bottom. And start there. We're playing 2 copies of Bone Splinter, so this deck does have 12 2-drops plus some other utility creatures along the way. So this is just pretty unconditional removal. All you need is a creature on the battlefield. And this deck again has lots of cheap utility creatures that it doesn't mind sacrificing once they've had their initial effect. So we're going to play 2 of these. We're not going to play too many more. We could max out, honestly, with the amount of creatures in this deck. We could play all 4, but then all of a sudden Evolutionary Leap is not going to be able to do its thing. So there is a little bit of tension between the 2 cards. So that's why I'm running 2 Bone Splinters instead of the full 4-pack. Peerless Mirror in a control deck. I think this is pretty obvious for shutting down aggro. 2-mana 1/1. When it dies, 2 damage to target creature or player. So even 3/3s can't swing into this thing on their own without dying to it. So it's a pretty good little guy. And with Bone Splinters and Evolutionary Leap, we can sack it on demand and shoot 2 damage wherever we want at instant speed. In most cases, with the Leap, Bone Splinters is going to be sorcery speed, but still pretty good. Gatecreeper Vine, 4-mana 0/2 Defender, so it really doesn't do anything, but it fetches you a land, and you can either get a gate or a basic land. So it fixes your colors. Make sure you hit your land drops. Control, we want to get to 7 lands, flip Nissa. Play Guy's Revenge, do all those sorts of things. So this guy, he comes down, he has, he's a utility creature like I was talking about with the other cards. And then you use the body to some other effect to get value. Same goes for Elvish Visionary. Instead of just drawing you the land that you want, it's the random card off the top. But it's just as good. It just keeps you moving through your deck, keeps your hand full, and has utility with your other creatures, or your other spells later on, to just block something if you want to, or just sacrifice it to Evolutionary Leap, draw a better card, Bone Splinters to kill something. It's just great. Shadows of the Past is also great. 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, scry 1. So this deck has a lot of removal, and if you ever languish with I don't know, 4, 5, 6 creatures, you get to scry 1 like 4, 5, 6 times in a row, and just dig down to the card you want to find. It's insane. It's also a win condition, because for 5 mana you can drain them 2 and gain 2 yourself. You need to have 4 creatures in your yard, but with Evolutionary Leap we're going to be sacrificing creatures anyway. And I think the deck runs 21 creatures, so that is not hard to turn on. So we're going to play one of those. Evolutionary Leap, we talked about. This card is fucking sick. I think anyone who's been playing or following Magic Duels for any amount of time knows that this is one of the powerhouse cards in the format. Really, really powerful if it doesn't get answered right away. I'm going to play 3 copies of Reeve Soul instead of the full 4. Destroy target creature with power 3 or less. So we're playing kind of 5 cheap removal spells. 2 of these guys and 3 of these guys. Plus we got Fleshbag Marauders, which I'll show you in a little while. So Reeve Soul is a good card. We don't need all 4 though, because we have some, we've also got Peerless Mirrors that we can sacrifice to act as removal. So 3 is a fine number, for this card. Lily is our other planeswalker. She's a 3-mana 2/3 lifelink, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, which you can, do with Evolutionary Leap or Bone Splinters, on demand, or Fleshbag Marauder, so you can just play her and flip her on the same turn. And then she becomes a planeswalker, and you get a 2/2 zombie. And here she is. She starts off with 3 loyalty plus 2. Each player discards a card, so we can start wrecking their hand. Her best ability, at least in this deck, is her -X. Since we've got all those cheap utility creatures, we can bring them back for a second round and then sacrifice them again and draw more cards. And her ultimate is pretty stupid. It's just whenever a creature dies, you get it. It's pretty broken. But if you get her up to her ultimate. You've probably already run it one anyway, so I think it's a little bit win more. But either way, it's a fantastic card. Fleshbag is one of the all-stars of this format as well. 3 mana, 3/1. Each player sacrifices a creature when it enters, so usually you'll just sacrifice this guy to its own trigger and put it in the graveyard for a Cruel Revival, which we'll get to later. But you can also, if you want to, depending on the situation, sacrifice your Perilous Mirror to shoot 2 damage somewhere. You can just get rid of one of your defenders if you need 3 power on board. So I mean, this guy's really good in this deck. Nissa, talked about her. She's pretty broken. Oh no, she's not broken, but she's extremely powerful. And we're going to play 1 copy of Reclamation Sage. There are some powerful enchantments and artifacts out there in the metagame. And with Liliana, we can reuse this. And Gravedigger actually is in the list, so we can pick it back up again. We have multiple ways to reuse it. And with Evolutionary Leap, it's more consistent to find your singletons than it would otherwise be. So I mean, that's another reason. I mean, Evolutionary Leap cycles, you get to sacrifice a creature and then draw a creature. These Planeswalkers, even though they are Planeswalkers on their backside, on their front face they are creatures, so Evolutionary Leap does dig for them. So that helps, since this is duels and our mythic rares are limited to 1 copy, it helps us find those 2 Planeswalkers that we have, which with much greater reliability. And it also helps to find, the utility singletons we have, like Reclamation Sage. And like our next card, Gravedigger, which again is a utility. We're going to be putting a lot of stuff in the yard. And Gravedigger can just dig something back up. I mean, you can play a Planeswalker, and if it dies, Gravedigger will go get it back, and you can flip it over again and start the process all over again. He's really good. You can also bring Gravedigger back with Lily's Minus ability, and then get another creature back into your hand and cast that. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. Gravedigger is also a zombie, so we're playing Cruel Revival in the deck, so you can kill something and get your Gravedigger back to your hand if it dies. So he's got some good synergy with what the deck is trying to do. Again, we don't mind playing the utility cards like one of this and one of that, because Evolutionary Leap really gives you that consistency that you wouldn't otherwise have. I'm going to play both copies of Languish. Obviously, if you're playing against something like Thopters or Elves that goes wide, you're going to want this card. -4/-4 until end of turn for 4 mana is really, really good. So we're going to play both of those. 3 copies of Bitter Revelation. So, I mean, the curve on this deck isn't really all that bad. We've got 2 1-drops, 18/2s, 6 3s, 6 4s, 2 5s, and 2 6s. So that's why I've chosen to play Bitter Revelation over Read the Bones. This always goes 4 cards deep, and you always get the 2 cards you want. If you play Read the Bones and you scry 2, and you see 1 card that you want, then you only get to go 3 deep, and you only get to pick 1 of the cards you want, and the other card's going to be random. But so you pay 1 extra mana for this, but you always get the 2 that you want out of the next 4. And it dumps stuff. Unlike Read the Bones, it dumps stuff in the graveyard, and for this deck we have some synergies there. With the Shadows of the Past, with the Gravediggers, with Liliana, with Cruel Revival. So I mean, I think Bitter Revelation is a really good card in this deck. Don't want the full 4 because it's not something you always want to cast, and you definitely don't want to see multiples. But when you need something, Bitter Rev is going to go and dig it up for you. And honestly, this deck can just play Bitter Revelation on turn 4 naturally, and not really worry about it too much. And if you're facing a wide board, then going and digging for a Languish is pretty good. So we're going to play Cruel Revival as well. Only 2 copies instead of 3. It kills any non-zombie creature, which is most of the commonly played creatures in this format are not zombies. Nantuko Husk is really the only card that's a zombie that's really, really scary if you can't remove it, because it's immune to Reave Soul if there's another creature on board. Bone Splinters or Fleshbag are our only real ways to kill it. And if it's naked on a board, then Reave Soul does the job as well. But so Nantuko Husk is a bit of a problem for this deck if we don't have a Languish. But even if we have a Languish and they have 2 creatures, they can make it a 6/6 in response. So Husk is a scary card for this deck. But anyway, Cruel Revival, 5 mana, kill pretty much anything, get a zombie back. We have 4 zombies in the deck: the Gravedigger and the 3 Fleshbags. I think in all my decks to play this card with the Fleshbags, I think 2 is fine. 3 just seems, I see a lot of people playing 3. I think that's kind of pushing it. But maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong, who knows. But 2 is what I've kind of settled on as my Cruel Revival number. It's been working pretty good for me, since it is 5 mana to kill something. And then we also have 1 copy of the Woodland Bellower. It's a 6 mana 6/5 that searches a non-legendary green creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less straight to the battlefield. So we can't get Nissa, unfortunately. But we can, however, get our Reclamation Sage, or just grab up a Visionary or a Gatecreeper Vine. Get an extra card if we need a land. Probably don't at that point if we're casting Bellower. But Visionary can get us a random card off the top, and it's it gives us an extra piece of fodder to sacrifice to Evo Leap or Bone Splinters. And being a 6/5, it lives through our own language or opposing languages if that's a thing. And you know, it's a pretty big body, and we tend to keep the board clean with this deck. So a 6/5 is actually a win condition. Very rarely, but it can be. And we're going to play the one of Guy's Revenge just because, again, I mean, this thing closes out games. We don't need to play both of them. We're going to find it with reasonable consistency, and I think one is just fine. As far as the mana base goes, we're going to play the two check lands. We're going to play all 4 gates, but we're also going to play all 4 Evolving Wilds. I mean, the deck has a pretty low curve. We don't mind playing 8 tap lands, and the Evolving Wilds will thin out the deck so that our draws get better over time. You know, this isn't an aggro deck where you're trying to win by 5 or 6 turns. So the thinning effect, if you thin 2 Evolving Wilds, I mean, the games are probably going to go 15 turns with this deck, so that it will have a marginal impact, you know, being able to strip lands out of your deck. It will have a marginal impact on your draws and drawing non-land cards a little bit more often. And also, it is really good with Nissa if you have an Evolving Wilds in play and you flip her, you know, you play the land and her flip trigger goes on the stack. If your opponent removes it with, you know, say a Twin Bolt or something, then you can crack your Evolving Wilds and get another Nissa flip trigger on the stack on top of it and flip her before the Twin Bolt resolves. So that's a really good reason to play 4 check lands. 4 Evolving Wilds in any deck with Nissa to protect her. You can play it as your 7th land and flip it if they have removal. So yeah, that's Golgari Control. We'll see how it does over the course of the next week. And hope you like it. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you for some gameplay in a couple of minutes.